I see you found our little hiding spot in the universe. Don't get too comfortable. This is a place where you will find those with an experience that's out of this world, or possibly deep within your life. I welcome you to the Oracles with James Tyson. Lean forward and listen. We will pull you into a supernatural journey with guests from around the world, each one experiencing some of the most extraordinary phenomena this wee planet has to offer. Now, here are the Oracles with James Tyson.
Thank you, Liam, and thank you, listener, for tuning in to this episode of the Oracles with James Tyson. It's me, James, and today I'm introducing you to Tui Snider. Now, Tui, that's T-U-I, is a author, a paranormal investigator, and a person who's just attracted to weird, strange, and dark things. She's from Port Townsend, Washington, out here in the Pacific Northwest, moved out to eastern Washington in the desert, around Pullman area, when she was a bit older, and now resides in North Texas. This is where she does most of her kind of the poking around into the odd, haunted, and just the weird. And there's a lot of that out there in Texas, she has found. She used to write fiction, and she moved to Texas, is where she's kind of got into the nonfiction bug. She likes to say that she used to write fiction, and then she moved to Texas, which is crazy. It's lots of stuff to do there. A number of her books. So we're going to talk to a couple. I'll just read off a few of her books. The new ones we are going to talk about. 6 Feet Under Texas is a continuation of one of her books. It's called Understanding Cemetery Symbols. And that's going to be a whole episode in itself, but not today. Today we are talking about Paranormal Texas, and it's your travel guide to the haunted places near Dallas-Fort Worth. And it's the second edition, which has got a bunch added in since the first edition. Their second edition just came out in August of last year being 2019. For those of you who are just tuning in here at the beginning of 2020. Another one of her publications, she actually put out these 2 books, which are really cool. One is called Graveyard Journal, and the other one is Ghost Hunter's Journal. And in this episode, we discuss the advantages of taking a notebook with you. It's, like I say, one of the guys I used to do paranormal investigations with, he said, if you needed to get down to the basics, take your a notebook and a piece of string, and nowadays a digital recorder. But you don't really need a lot. You don't need all that fancy equipment. Hang a piece of string up and say, hey, can you move this? And see if that works. Make notes. You don't have to say anything out loud. When you hear a voice, don't start yelling and screaming to everybody around you that you heard a voice and get into big, huge conversation. Because that voice may have been the beginning of a long diatribe from some spirit, but you've talked over top of it for 10 minutes. But make a note in your notebook, and in the debrief at the end of the paranormal investigation, discuss different things that you heard. So, again, what she does is pokes around, goes in, researches, goes to the archives, digs up everything she can about certain locations, and writes it all down. And Paranormal Texas is one of her first books. I think came out in 2014, but the second edition, which is what we'll talk about, is 2019. Also going to talk about a book that's at the editor right now, and it is the Great Texas Airship Mystery of 1897. The Great Texas Airship Mystery of 1897. That is a compilation of a bunch of newspaper articles where she's actually gone through and researched them and adds the articles and the eyewitness accounts of what people saw. It was about 100 or so sightings of something flying in the sky back in 1897. And basically the only thing around the U.S. back then were balloons. I mean, like the hot air balloons. people were using. So, but these weren't described as that. They were described as cigar-shaped. And this comes out to a place called Auburn, Texas, where there was a believed being had crashed and was badly burnt and buried in the ground, and which is where you usually bury people. But the tombstone on it was a cigar-shaped craft with like three portholes in the side of it. That is the second of the tombstones, kind of copying what the original broken one looked like. The original broken one was been removed, and then 30, 40 years ago, another tombstone had been put on it with a similar carving on the side of it, and that disappeared. No one knows where that is now. So, and which meant nobody knows exactly where the grave for this quote-unquote alien was. And when the new tombstone was taken, it's kind of awkward, too. They don't really remember exactly where it was. But luckily, if you were to Google the Auburn Cemetery and airship, you'll see a picture, and that's actually Tui's picture, because she's about the only one who ever took a photograph of that second gravestone or tombstone. And now it's got a third one, which I think is just a rock with a felt pen on it saying E.T. buried here or something like that. That's what we'll be talking about. So we're going to touch on her paranormal book, then get into a little bit on the Great Texas Airship Mystery of 1897. And before we go, we'll talk about 6 Feet Under, that continuation of the Understanding Cemetery Symbols. And it didn't quite fit in that other book because it talks more about the really bizarre grave sites in Texas. Go to our website, please check it out, tuisnider.com. Again, that's tuisnider.com, tuisnider.com. And remember, if you're down in, it's down for me. Texas is south. But if you're up in North Texas, up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, going to a paranormal conference, keep an eye out for Tui Snider. Check out her books when they're there. Grab a journal. If you're a paranormal investigator, grab yourself a journal. It's the best thing to have when you're out doing an investigation. Make notes and sketch, for goodness sakes. Make some sketches while you're doing it and compare the notes afterwards. Let's bring Tui in. She's probably on the phone here. Hello, Tui. How are you?
I am great, James. How are you?
I am well up here on a cool winter day up here on the lower left Pacific coast of Canada. How's Texas?
Texas is pretty chilly for Texas. Probably not by your standards, but it's a little bit cold for us.
Which part of Texas are you in?
I am in the northern part. I'm in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Mm-hmm. So not on the panhandle. I'm kind of just up there in the mid-center of the north.
Mid-center North Texas.
Does that make any sense?
Not at all, but it's kind of cool.
Texas is crazy because Eastland is in West Texas. West Texas is in South Texas. So you can't pay attention to that.
Well, so, yeah. It's not making any sense at all, young lady.
No. I didn't get to name it, so there you go.
How long have you been there?
I have been here for 10 years, which is kind of freaking me out. This is the longest I have lived in my adult life anywhere. I moved down here, lured down here by my husband, my then boyfriend. Okay. Well, we joke, it was my family was very concerned. So yeah, I moved down here, and oh my gosh, it's been great. But it's amazing because before that, I think I moved something like 14 times in 10 years. So for me to be in the same place, it's just in the same house, no less, has been really surprising.
Do you know Greg Abbott?
Greg Abbott, yeah. I met him at the UFO Congress.
No, the governor of Texas?
Oh, that one. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. No.
No, hold on.
Oh, my goodness.
Have you been to Guadalupe Peak?
No, I have not.
Oh, God. Man, you don't know the governor and you've never been to the highest point in Texas? Come on.
No. I have not seen the Marfa lights, and that is so high on my list. I mean, I've wanted to, long before I ever knew I was going to live in Texas, I wanted to see the Marfa lights. Texas is big, though. I mean, I think I'm a good, 12-hour drive at least to get down to Marfa. So.
Oh, okay. Well,
this is one big state. I tell you, I've lived in countries smaller than Texas. I lived in Belgium,
Texas
so
is
it's very different.
I remember learning that because we had a big French population in obviously we still do in Canada. But France actually was one of the first I think was the first European country to have a colony in what's now Texas.
Oh, yeah.
And it was France and then Mexico and everybody else, Republic, and they're all over the place.
Well, there's that whole Six Flags over Texas thing. But the one thing about it, one flag that did not fly over Texas, which is a little surprising, maybe, is the German flag, just simply because there's such a German influence here. Mm-hmm. There is actually, Texas has its own sub-dialect of German. You can go on YouTube and listen to it. It is so cool because you can hear it. It's really fun to listen to because you can kind of hear little southern twang, but they're verstehen, die Deutsche, and it's like, it's just really neat. It's like this mashup, but it's a genuine thing. And to a German ear, it sounds a little bit old-fashioned because they have some old-fashioned tense still in it. So it is pretty fun. And they have words like, I love the word, because they don't have skunks in Europe. So they had to come up with their own word for it, and they came up with the word stinkcats, which is so great. I love that. Yeah, so there you go. It's kind of fun. And there's good German food here as well.
There are, and there's really cute girls. What I remember from being younger and hanging out in an area of Texas where they had a whole bunch of the German all these beautiful blonde girls with perfect teeth, and I'm thinking, wow, this is kind of cool. And they said, yeah, we have this big German population. I said, really? Like the prisoner of war camps emptied out here or something? How did that happen?
There is some of that. Okay, there were actually prisoner of war camps here, but it was in the 1830s or so. The port of Galveston was kind of like Ellis Island. I mean, everyone hears about Ellis Island when they think of Europeans immigrating to America. That's what I always thought. But then when I heard some people speaking Texas in German, Germany.
In Texas.
I can't talk anymore, apparently. I used to speak English when I did. So I did a little research, and then I found out that, oh my gosh, there were tens of thousands of Germans who immigrated to America. They came through the port of Galveston, and that's part of why there are some really good beers down in that area. And there's certainly wonderful German restaurants all throughout Texas, but I didn't realize there was such an influence. And it is kind of rare for the descendants of Europeans to still speak their language in English. Not many, they're like, the German to have been, for this Texas German to have been preserved is quite rare. I mean, it's dying out, but it's one. You look at all of America, you think we'd have a lot more pockets of people speaking, I don't know, Czech or speaking French since they came to America. But most people just, abandoned by the second or third generation. They had been assimilated and we're speaking English. So it's kind of cool that Texas German still lingers.
Yeah, it is. If you mentioned Galveston, that's one of the most haunted Galveston Island.
Yeah.
Is one of the most haunted locations in the United States. It's crazy down there.
Have you had some experiences down there?
No, but I interviewed a guy years ago who had the coolest name, and I can't remember it right now.
Is it Dash Beardsley?
Yes! That was him! Isn't that a cool name? Hi, I'm Dash Beardsley.
Oh, yeah, he's such a character. He's a lot of fun, and he is really up on all that. He's the ghost man of Galveston.
Yeah, he did all the tours. I got to get Dash back on, because he was very, very cool. And he was telling me about Galveston Island and the history and the deaths and the sorrow and I was going to say all the cool stuff, but but it was from translucent figures floating around and ghost boats coming to dock, and it was just amazing, the stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, there are. Well, with all the hurricanes, and then there was just some incredible stories of this woman, this one nun who. She heard that, she thought that her classroom could just wait out a hurricane. So I think they all held hands, and then they were all swept out to sea. Things like that. There's some real tragic stories. So, that place deserves to be haunted. When you hear some of the history, you're like, well, of course it's haunted.
Yeah, Dash Beardsley. That was a cool conversation. Now, and that's the South. You're up in the North, and one of the books that I want to talk to you about is a book that came out last year. It's the second edition. It's Paranormal Texas, Your Travel Guide to Haunted Places Near Dallas and Fort Worth. What kind of interesting places do you have around Dallas and Fort Worth? Now, is Dallas, Texas has an area in town called the Stockyards?
Actually, that's in Fort Worth.
That's Fort Worth, okay.
Yeah, and Fort Worth is like, okay, Dallas and Fort Worth are only 30 miles apart from each other, but they're worlds away, and because just the feel of the town. So Fort Worth is where you're going to see people wearing cowboy hats, and they have some places where you can get custom made cowboy boots that are going to take, the better part of a year before you get them back. They're going to measure your feet and make them. That's where the Stockyards are.
Okay.
And the Stockyards is where Hell's Half Acre was. And Hell's Half Acre was actually a 3-acre section in Fort Worth that really was like the who's who of the Wild West. So Fort Worth calls itself where the West begins. And when you look into the Fort Worth's history and you look into Hell's Half Acre, that's where this is like, it's the south side of town. I don't know why the south side of town is usually, how that is? It's usually the bad side of town for whatever reason. But that's where you're going to hear all the legends of like Butch Cassidy, Wyatt Earp, Sam Bass, Luke Short, Doc Holliday. There's even long-haired Jim Courtwright, got shot down there. And it's just a really historical part of town with a lot of really intriguing Wild West cowboy, all the crazy stuff that you watch cowboy movies about when you're a kid. Those things probably actually happened in Fort Worth.
Well, that was also the red light district, too, Hell's Half Acre.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. That's where the cockfighting was. That's where they played dice. And they would, there was a game called Pharaoh, which I didn't know. That's actually when you think they're playing poker in the Old West, they're actually probably playing Pharaoh. So I went to a historic reenactment in a cemetery in Fort Worth, and there were guys with these really genuine mustaches, like Old West mustaches, and they were in the attire. I mean, they live in this, full year. It's not like they just put on their clothes. You got to work that mustache to get it like that. And they were playing Pharaoh, and they were talking about, what it really would have been like to live in that time period. It's pretty fascinating. So with a history like that, you are going to get some good ghost stories, I tell you.
Well, yeah, and for those people who don't understand, we just threw out the name Stockyards, but that's actually the place. If you back in the day when all the you would get on your cattle run, sending them to market, that was your destination. You brought them in from the ranches to the stockyards where they were sold and shipped out. So now you've got a bunch of cowboys with a pocket full of money. So Hell's Half Acre, it had the red light district because those things follow the money. That's where the bordellos, the boarding houses, gambling parlors, saloons, everything, and a whole bunch of mercantile businesses like your clothing stores and your boots and your tack and whatever. That all kind of was in one big conglomeration. So that brought in the gamblers and anybody who preyed upon a bunch of young guys in their 20s with a pocket full of money because they just and they're hot, tired, and hungry and been on a cattle drive for the last 3 weeks. Yeah, this is where it's all going to come together. So there is going to be shenanigans, and there is going to be a lot of negative energy on the periphery of that, and a lot of positive energy, and a lot of, like I say, a lot of shenanigans. But that type of thing usually does have the residual effect of interesting hauntings. You get people who just haven't crossed over because they're either having fun with everybody else who stayed back, or they have a perception is, I'm going to go to hell. So, you know what? I'm going to stay here. This is kind of fun. What did you find when you're in a place like that and when you're doing your research for your book, your Paranormal Texas? When you start looking into that, what are the types of events or hauntings what did you bump into?
Well, I have something kind of funny to say. One thing that surprised me when I was, and I have a YouTube video about this, so I started sharing a few things on my YouTube channel because I thought that would just be fun. But
what's your YouTube channel?
It's just Tui Snider. I think if you just go to go to YouTube and type Tui Snider. I've got an actual, what is it? It's, okay, I'm looking to see. Yeah, it's just youtube.com/c/Tui Snider should get you there.
Okay. And Tui is T-U-I.
Yeah, T-U-I, and Snider is S-N-I-D-E-R. There's no Y's in my name, so if you're wondering, getting a broken URL, it's like you might be using a Y. But, yeah, so it was kind of funny. So, the reason I did a second edition was people wanted photographs. I didn't have photographs in my first edition, and they wanted photographs of it. They wanted to hear more of my firsthand experiences. Like, readers would say, yeah, but what did you experience at these places? So I didn't include as much in my first book because I kind of thought, well, people don't want to know what I experienced. As it turns out, hey, who doesn't, everyone loves a good ghost story, right? So if I experience something, I do include it in the book. Now, one of the things I noticed when I would go around to different places, I started to notice some strange trends. And one of the things was there was a name that kept coming up on spirit boxes and also when I would go, okay, so I would go, like, I'll hear that a place, my readers will tell me that a place is haunted. Hey, you got to check out this hotel or this restaurant, or I will do some research, or you know how it is. I just have a collection all the time of places I want to check out. So when I go there and I start talking to people and I want to talk to people who've had some experiences of their own, a certain name kept coming up over and over, and it was cracking me up. I don't know if you can take a wild guess what the name might be. Probably not, but
no.
I don't know how anybody could really, but
now you're just being silly. Come on, what is it?
It's Steve, which is weird. And
Steve?
so many, yeah. And so I was going back through my notes, and I was getting confused because I was like, okay, this hotel, and they noticed that there's a ghost named Steve, and then I'm writing another chapter, and I'm like, oh yeah, let me look back and see what they said, and then the spirit box picks up the name Steve, and I'm like, Steve? And so I looked through, I had it all in a document so I could do a find. And I did a find for all the Steves, and I was just laughing, like, if I hadn't been taking notes, I really wouldn't have noticed, because Steve's not such a weird name that it doesn't stick in your head. It wasn't like Ronaldo or, I don't know, Shaniqua or something. It was Steve. And so I noticed that for whatever reason, here in North Texas, I have no idea why, but when I'm on a paranormal investigation and we get a name through the ghost box and it suddenly, we'll say, who's here? And we'll hear Steve. I'm like, of course, figures, another Steve. So I don't know what the deal is there, but I just thought that was funny. And I think that would be a fun thing. Now I'm curious, like, what names are cropping up for other people who are doing research in different parts? Maybe Southern Texas, it's Randy and not Steve. I don't know. I can only speak for my little neck of the woods.
That is interesting, right? It also depends to depends what your theories on spirit boxes are.
Mm-hmm.
And,
well, this wasn't all spirit boxes. This was also, sometimes they would just say, "Oh, we believe this is a Steve," or so. Yeah, so it wasn't always spirit box. It was just a name associated with a haunting that was the most common. And I'm not someone who. When it comes to equipment, spirit boxes aren't really my favorite thing. I'm a big fan. I really love EVPs. Those are the things that really perk my ears up. I just love it if we're having a conversation and then we play it back and there's a third voice that's not me or you, quite obviously. Or, when I was doing research for the second edition, and if people want to hear this, they can go to my YouTube channel again. When I was at the Old Park Hotel, I had the weirdest experience with an EVP. I call it a doppelganger. It sounded just like me. It was the strangest thing.
That is weird. Like, that'll happen because I've been on paranormal investigations where people will hear a voice and will play it back and they'll say, "Well, that's your voice. You said it." I said, "I wasn't even in that room." You
have had that. This was the first time for me.
It's quite common that they'll come in especially if you've been doing a lot of talking. And you'll come in and it'll be I shouldn't say the same voice, but darn similar.
Yeah, this one sounded, because a lot of times you might have had this happen where people go, "Oh, he looks just like you." And then you see your supposed, look-alike and you're like, well, we both have a face. I mean, but this was weird. And also at the Old Park Hotel, it wasn't just my voice came through later in the night. They saw me walk by. So apparently something was having fun impersonating me that night. I don't know what it was, but it was to the degree that when I heard it back, I thought, wow, if I didn't know that that I wasn't speaking right then. It was me. It sounded like me singing. And I'm like, I would think that's my voice. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that? I kind of thought before this, I thought, the doppelgangers are probably something that people, had. It was an idea people had before we had photography, and you could really see that, oh, okay, this is someone who just kind of looks alike. I just didn't think it was a real thing.
I don't know. Doppelganger, it's, what's it from?
German, yeah.
Denmark.
Oh, is it Danish?
Doppelganger was somebody. Now, I may have to Google this before I finish this, but I understand it actually was somebody showed up, like you were expected home at noon, and at 11 a.m. your parents are upstairs and they hear you come in the door.
And I've heard accounts of this, yeah.
Yeah, and they wait for you to walk up the stairs, but you don't come up. And then at noon, they hear exactly the same sounds, identical.
So maybe that's the wrong thing for me to call what my experience was. Something was mimicking me.
No, I think you're right, though. An apparition or double of a living person. I just Googled it. Doppelganger. Oh, okay. Now I'm trying to think of what the heck I was thinking of about this Danish thing. Other tradition stories equate a doppelganger with an evil twin. In modern times, a term twin stranger is occasionally used. The word doppelganger is often used in more a general and neutral sense, and slang to describe a person who physically remembers another person. It's interesting, and that is Doppelganger. Is German, so I can't remember what this Danish thing that I was thinking of, the something that comes before someone gets there, which happened. That's happened. My cousins lived in a crazy haunted house. It used to be a doctor's home in a small town in Alberta, up in Canada, and it was a doctor's home back in the 1930s, and of course, the mom and dad are waiting for the, kind of half asleep, waiting for your kids to get home. And they hear when the last kid gets home, and they hear him open the door, shut the door, kick the shoes off, the whole bit. And then an hour later, hear exactly the same thing, which gets both the parents up going, who the hell's that?
Yeah.
And it's the kid coming home. And they said, well, you came home an hour ago. And he says, no, I didn't.
You know what's weird? Now that you say that, something similar used to happen to my dad when my sister was a teenager. He would hear her, he would think she had locked herself out. He would hear knocking downstairs because she lived in a little basement apartment. And so he would go down and she wouldn't be there. And then he would go back upstairs. And then 10 minutes later, she would actually come home. So that was just a weird thing. And he didn't tell anybody about this until recently. I'm like, well, that would have been nice because I was having strange experiences in that house. I would have liked to have a little backup. Everyone was just patting me on the head and going, oh, yeah, you and your big imagination. But he mentioned something similar, and it was with my sister when she was a teenager. It was like a little, I don't remember if it was 10 minutes or a half an hour, but he said it was almost the exact same. Like he grew to know that when this happened, it just meant she was going to be coming home soon.
Yeah, it is weird, and it's one of those things that, and sometimes a dog, it's like dogs will sense it. Somebody, the dog will get kind of anxious 10 or 15 minutes before someone shows up at the house. Well, how do they know they're showing up? If they're not dropping in at a specific time every day, how does that dog know they're going to be there in 10 minutes? Yes, a minute beforehand, maybe they heard they recognize the car sound or their bike or whatever walking down the street. But how 10 to 15 to 20 minutes away, well, that person is still out in the middle of nowhere. How do they know that person's coming? So, yeah, maybe there is something to that.
Yeah, maybe so. Well, another thing that I found when I was coming up with the second edition for Paranormal Texas, which I consider a travel guide. It's just a travel guide that's going to take you to haunted places. So that's the whole purpose. It's just meant to, I want to take people, my mission, with this book, is I want people to go, you know what, I'm going to unplug for the weekend. I'm just going to go out and I'm going to go to this allegedly haunted place and see if I can get have anything happen. And that's one of my soapboxes. It's like, okay, let's get out, explore the world right around you. You don't have to go to another time zone. And the other thing I like about getting people out to do ghost hunting is that, it engages you with your local history. And then also it gets you to I think it's just kind of a fun way to practice mindfulness. There's all this talk, and especially it's January, so I see people making their goals and what they say what 2020 is going to be like for them. And a lot of my friends, I'm going to meditate more and I'm going to be more mindful. And I'm like, just do some mindful activities, do some fun activities that get you out paying attention to your senses. Sit quietly somewhere and see if you notice something out of the blue, or pay attention. So that's a big reason I think that ghost hunting can be a good thing for people to do, and I think it can help us connect us more.
Yeah, it also gets a bunch of people out focusing on one thing. And there is the drawbacks of paranormal investigations. I think we used to call it paradrama. And that is getting a whole bunch of empathic people out as a group in a mixed group of people. And you'd have shenanigans. You'd get the two married people horsing around. Like, it was really hard. There was always some, I think the last two groups I belonged to, like the head of the group was hitting on the married girls, and the married guy was hitting on the two married girls to the point that it was like, yeah, we got to leave. And it was the weirdest thing, and it was different than like joining the chess club or the curling team, or you're playing tennis. It was always this paranormal thing, a bunch of people sitting in the dark and being weird.
I guess and I do mention this a little bit in my book too. It took me a while to find. It was a real eye opener. So I when I was researching it, I had only had my paranormal experiences on my own. I hadn't been part of a paranormal investigation. So I thought, I'm going to contact all these paranormal teams and tell them I'm a writer and can I come along? And as you say, oh boy, I quickly realized that pretty much anyone can call himself a paranormal team. I don't know why I hadn't thought about that. It's not like they have to, the good housekeeping seal of approval for paranormal. Nah, you got to vet these people. And I ended up in some real sketchy situations. Like the very first one I went on, and it was a really haunted place, for starters. But it was also in a really sketchy part of town. And as soon as they saw lights on, we had just, drunk people coming up and lurking out in the bushes and everything, and just kind of scary people. Well, suddenly I noticed, like, the people that I was with, too, they had brought a lot of booze with them, and I'm smelling wacky tobacco, and I'm thinking, wow, this is a paranormal team? When are they going to settle down? They were making all this noise. I'd brought my own little chair. I thought we were going to be up all night. I'm sitting there. Suddenly I'm in a room and I'm like, oh, wow, it's finally kind of quiet. Maybe, we're going to get down to the serious investigation now. I kind of gingerly notice that it's like, well, I notice that it's maybe too quiet. And I go around the corner and it's just me and one other woman. And I get a text on my phone, and basically everyone else had left. They've either gotten scared or whatever, and they just left us alone in this really scary, sketchy place. So yeah, that was eye-opening. So I'm real careful about who I will spend time with on a paranormal investigation. And I have learned that, there's only 2 or 3 groups that I really trust my time with, because you can really get into some dangerous situations. For one thing, a lot of times you're in an old building, you're walking around in the dark. I mean, yeah, it's not great. One of the things I'm putting together a workshop on paranormal investigations. One of the things that I found from being on Paranormal Teams is nobody knows why they're doing it. Well, we're doing it because we had a couple call, and they think there might be a ghost in their house, and they want us to check. I said, okay. And why do they think there's a ghost in the house? Well, because they see a ghost in their house. Okay, that makes it pretty easy. Are they insane? Or are they both like? We both see a lady in a blue dress at the top of the stairs. We see her at different times, and our kids have seen her. My aunt's seen her, and we're wondering if our house is haunted. And you kind of look at them and go, "Yeah, your house is haunted because you all see a lady in a blue dress at the top of the stairs." But we're not. We need to hear that from someone else. I think you still don't really trust yourself. I can understand needing to hear that from someone else. Like, are we just collectively crazy? Which I don't know if there really are mass hallucinations. Like, but But yeah, no, that sounds like a really good workshop that you're going to give. I think a lot of teams don't do that pre-investigative work. So the ones I like, they will go in ahead of time and maybe vet to see if it's even, well, if it's a private home, they're going to come in and they're going to, look for a lot of things to debunk. And yeah, sometimes people are disappointed when they find out it's just their furnace turning on. But you asked to find out what the thumping was.
And the trick is, you walk in and only one person on the team should know what the people have seen. Because if you walk in and the entire team is there and the lady says there's a woman who comes out of that room upstairs in a blue dress, well, everybody's going to be looking upstairs and focusing on a lady in a blue dress, and you'll probably see one because you're all looking for the lady in the blue dress. Meanwhile, down the hall could be three kids on a skateboard and a ghost of a dog, and you're not paying attention. So one person knows what the task is. Everybody gets evidence, and they sit down and they go through it and filter it. And at that point, once it's all on paper, the person says, okay, we're looking for a lady in a blue dress. And they say, oh, look at this. I made notes here. I had a lady in a blue dress come out. Or I've got a picture of what looks like some female figure in a blue dress. Or I've got a woman's voice, but only at the top of the stairs. So you're going, okay, we'll give that to the homeowner. But the trick is, Tui, what do you do next?
Well, I'm a big proponent of, and this is my big soapbox too, is I think everyone should write down what they've done. You should write notes at the end of their paranormal investigation, if not take them along the way. And I don't care. I know you're tired. I know it's late. I know all you want to do is go to bed, but and they can be slapdash notes, but you should record them. And then what's going to be so fun is later you're going to look through those notes. Also, I think it's good to write them up in more detail when you're more awake. But just in the moment, before you're too bleary, just write down all the ideas and the little things that flash through your head. That's been a big deal to me because I always kind of discounted those. Oh, I just had a little flash of a lady in blue. For me, it might be that. I won't physically see her, but I'll be like, for some reason, I had a little mental daydream about it. And then later, when we're all corroborating or comparing notes, then it gets really exciting. And over time, you can look back, and then that's when it's exciting. You're like, what's the deal with all these guys named Steve in North Texas, for instance? Or, other things will kind of come out. I might notice, like, every time Jerry comes with me, we get a lot of, EVPs in a kind of a gruff male voice. Or you start to connect these dots that you would not connect otherwise. And people, when I tell them this, they're like, yeah, that's because you're a writer. You want everyone to keep notes. Well, what? I don't know.
That's what you're supposed to do. That's if I was going to when I was first introduced to this, the guy told me, and this guy used to do it in England. This is like he's been doing it since he was a kid, and and for a long time, and for longer than anyone I've ever met in this part of the world in Western Canada. And I said, well, what is your base things you take? He says a notebook and a piece of string.
I like the notebook.
And you said you make notes. The whole thing. You don't talk. You don't. And now obviously we added a recorder. So okay, fine. And I found on teams where you would all be listening through your recorders to the sound, and you'd ask a question, and eventually you might get an answer. Well, if you've got 9 people listening to that, what is your name? And you get Steve. And the first thing that happens is you get one of the people saying, I heard Steve. Did you hear Steve? Yeah, I heard Steve. And so for 10 minutes, people are talking. But Steve is going on telling all about his life and why he is there and everything. And you miss it all because you get all these yappers. So you just write notes. I heard Steve at this point. Check your watch. At this time, we asked this question. I heard the name. And you compare notes later. Don't get all freaky. Do not ever, you don't say, you can use my energy, you can touch my arm, and then freak out when they touch your arm and go screaming down the hall like a certain fellow on like those TV series. Don't do that. They're not going to eat your soul. Just do your thing. But my biggest drawback, Tui, is once you get the evidence, what do you do? It's these, you go to the
Exactly.
It's like, okay, what should we do with the ghost? Do you want him to stay here? Do you want it to leave? Should we interdict? But no, the teams that I were on, they would say, yeah, we have some evidence, but we'd like to come back next week. And the homeowners would say, oh, okay, fine. And we just want to be sure. And they bring a bunch of different people in to talk to the ghost. And then they bring another bunch of people in the next week and basically turn it into a little ghost tourism thing.
Yeah.
And it was a pain in the ass. All the ghosts are saying, I would like to go home. I would like to leave here. I would like to cross over. And, oh, no. What's your name? Can you jump through the hoop? Can you kick the ball? Can you make the light go off? Can you make it go on? Can you juggle? Can you sing? It was like, dude, you got a ghost here. It should move on. So get your poop together.
And there are places.
That's my soapbox.
Yeah, no, I get that, because I think there's a big difference between just paranormal thrill seekers and people who are seriously on some just quest. It doesn't have to, I'm not talking too lofty, but just a quest to understand the universe and maybe be helpful. But I think some people just want to run from one thrill to the next. And so they're the people who ask for the ghost to touch them and then scream and run down the hall when it does. And then there are the people who, like, I thought maybe I was going to be scared and run out of the room. But instead, my curiosity just makes me want to know more. Like, okay, it touched me. I felt something. Wow, what else is here? I don't think people take the time afterwards to digest what they experienced, because they're just on to where are we going next week?
Yeah.
What are we going to see next week? Oh, this place. Let's go to that place. And but I compare it a lot to bird watching, because if I had some rare species of bird in my backyard and I invited you over to see it, you wouldn't, just burst out the back door, run around, throw your binoculars in the air and scream, "Where's the bird?" I mean, if you did, you would not expect to see it, because the thing's going to be freaked out and go away. I mean, I think a similar thing happens on some of these paranormal investigations where people are just so noisy that, I mean, I'm like, how can you even expect to experience anything? But what they do is they buy fancier and fancier equipment, and they expect the equipment to do all the listening for them. And I'm like, you have to quiet your own energy down to experience something. So that's another thing that gets me. I feel like we should be sitting out on a back porch in a porch swing right now going, and another thing about them ghost hunter types that gets to me.
We should be venting.
Yeah, I'm venting. I am. I'm venting.
Yeah, it happens. I get so fed up with these people that want to go out. So I want to go on a paranormal investigation. And my first question,
that's a great question.
It's a haunted place. Yeah, okay. Every place is there's ghosts everywhere.
Yes,
absolutely everywhere. If you want to talk to a ghost, and since we get into the woo-woo conversation of the veil thinning in 2012, and that's why more and more people are hearing them. Literally take a tape recorder, just plunk it in the middle of an empty football field at midnight, and start asking questions. And someone's going to show up and want to talk to you.
Yeah.
You don't need to be in an old house. You don't need to be in the Stockyards in an old bordello. Those might be a little more active, and you may think it's a little more fun, but you could do it like in your backyard.
Oh, for sure. Definitely. I agree with you totally. I think, but I just wish people would spend a little more time digesting the experiences that they do have. I think that it's much more exciting then. And taking notes, because when you do take the notes, then that's the thrill. Then you have something also. If you want people to take you seriously, if you're someone who does a lot of paranormal investigations, and you're like, Joe's the ghost hunter in our family, and your family's rolling their eyes. If you have a notebook you can show them, and you have a website maybe where you share some of your better photos, or maybe your EVPs that you've gotten, maybe your family will start to take you seriously. But it's like any science. If people don't, amateurs can contribute to science. And my case in point would be astronomy. All sorts of things happen. All sorts of advancements happen from just someone who's a passionate backyard observer. But they are a backyard observer, and they're taking notes. And there's a lot of boredom. There's a lot of nights where nothing happens. You mentioned how, you could sit and every place is haunted. But on the other hand, too, it's not like just because you're ready doesn't guarantee that things are going to happen. There's a certain amount of dedication on your side, and being willing to embrace a little boredom too. Things aren't always going to happen.
Yeah, and a lot of times, nothing on the other side wants to talk to you just because of who you are or what you're asking them to do. I went to a very, very haunted location here to film a documentary. A Legion. This is a place that was all the war veterans go to and have beer, and there's a bar there. And at the bar, it's very common to hear voices when you're at the bar. Well, actually, when you drink a lot, you can hear a lot of voices. But this up at the bar where all the mugs are hanging and stuff, people will hear voices. So we put a couple of recorders on the bar, and I hung my piece of string. Now, it's really easy when you hang a piece of string to get it to move. And when you hang it, of course, people say, oh, what if the door opens and the air conditioning kicks in? It's like, well, then you make notes of that. This is why you have a notebook. But it was hanging there. We let it hang, and nothing was moving, and nobody was doing anything. And I said, if you're here, could you make the string move? Nothing. But when we replayed the recordings back, there was a male voice, very gruff, who said, don't touch the string. So he was telling all the other ghosts, the spirits, like, no, these guys are jerking around with us. We're not going to be playing games with them. We don't want to give them the time of day. So
that is hilarious.
Yeah, he just didn't he didn't realize that we were going to pick up his voice telling the other ones not to touch the string. But that's why our string didn't move. So you can't come out of there going, yeah, I guess there are no ghosts. Well,
I get that from people. They'll be like, oh, did you write about such and such hotel? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, well, that place isn't haunted. Shouldn't be in your book. I went there and nothing happened. And I'm like, whatever, God.
Yeah.
I guess, I'll take it out now.
Yeah, let me just erase everything in my book. What other, we touched on the Stockyards and Hell's Half Acre and kind of real briefly on why that place would be active. In your book, Paranormal Texas, a travel guide to haunted places around Dallas and Fort Worth, what other places jumped out at you?
Well, other places, obviously, other things that happened that surprised me was I learned that haunted elevators are a thing.
Yep.
I just didn't realize that before I started seriously taking notes and going around. I started to notice that, elevators, what I like about haunted elevators is that they're haunted in different ways. Like, not every elevator, so you can't say that, well, this is just a glitch that happens with elevators. Different things will happen to the elevators at different places. Like, there's one in Weatherford, Texas, where on like a Friday or Saturday night, suddenly the elevator will start opening up on the ground floor, and then it will go up to where the ballroom is, open up on that floor, and then come back down. And I'll do this over and over as if people are coming and going from their ballroom. And the ballroom has been quite haunted. Like, people have heard music going, like 40s music or big band music. And unsurprisingly, a lot of this happened when there was a big remodel going on. You know how for some reason remodeling often triggers more paranormal activity. And then you get the workmen getting jumpy and starting to complain. You've probably come across cases like that.
Yep.
Why do you think that is? Do you think it's just that the people are unsettled? If there's spirits there, they just are. It's kind of like that movie, The Others, where they're like, "Why are you moving things around in my house?"
Well, they're basically, in my understanding, especially with the construction workers, where you come in to remove a wall or move things around. It's you got a dead person who may or may not have mental health issues in life, and now in death. They didn't cross over, so they're kind of hanging out in their comfort zone. This is I'm comfortable here. This is my house. And I don't like you hanging all these things on the walls, or I do not like you removing the wall or putting new flooring in. So they try to interfere with it the best they can, and which is like moving your tools around. And that's about it. It's nothing malicious. It's just that they'd rather not have you. It's like someone coming into your bedroom and rearranging it without your permission.
Yeah, which is always irritating. So, yeah, I wouldn't like that.
Yeah, so I think that's about it. We are talking to Tui Snider. That is Snider, Tui, Tui. Tui Snider, she's an author and a speaker and a personal friend of mine. You can follow her shenanigans. Here, I keep saying shenanigans today. You can follow her on tuisnider.com. Check out the books that she's been writing. We're kind of all over the place right now. We're talking from the weather to strange things that go on in Texas. We're talking about Paranormal Texas, one of her books, Your Travel Guide to Haunted Places near Dallas and Fort Worth. Second edition came out in August of last year, but tons of other books. She's been digging around in the paranormal side of life, which is kind of cool. Tui, you're Paranormal Texas. You also have we were talking about it just a little bit earlier about how amateurs can kind of like help out with scientific research, but you actually have a link where you get people, if you want to upload an EVP or listen to other people's EVPs.
Yeah, so that was one thing I added to the second edition of Paranormal Texas. Was I thought, you know what, this is a book that when I picture my ideal reader, they've got their paperback version of it stuck in their glove box, and they're thinking, hey, I got to go to, McKinney or Mineral Wells for work next week. Maybe I'll see what's haunted there. They'll pull it out, and they'll want to know, like, oh, I see, I'm going to be right near the Crazy Water Hotel. I wonder what other people have experienced there. And so they could go to my paranormal what have I call it? Calling the North. I can't even remember the name of it. I made a database for people, basically, where they can go and see what other people have experienced at these different places. It's like a way for us to share things. So if you go to any of the places mentioned in my book and you get a really crazy good photo of something anomalous, or a wonderful, Class A EVP you want to share with the world, you could post it online and then send me the link, and I will add it to this database so that other people can look and see what all's happening. And my hope with this is that if over time enough people contribute to the database, it's very much a work in progress, but that we can kind of see maybe certain things will emerge. We might know that we wouldn't have known. We might go, you know what? Look at what's going on here. Every April, there's just crazy paranormal activity at this location in Fort Worth, or look at all these EVPs that are saying the same thing, or we found another Steve over here, just different things like that. So that was my hope with it, because you know how in the UFO community, they've got MUFON, and they have tremendous databases, and there are people who are really keeping track of all the nitty gritty and all the details, and drawing correlations between, hey, there was an incident in North Dakota that's a lot like this one down in Texas. And if we don't share these, what we're experiencing, if number one, we don't keep track of it, and then number two, we don't share it in some manner, we're not going to be able to connect these dots and make some discoveries. So that's really my hope.
Wow, that's it. And it's good. It is a way to get people involved and to let people understand there's other ways of doing things. And to connect with other people who have a similar interest. So I like that idea. Where can people connect with that?
Yeah, so I just call it the Evidence Database for Paranormal Texas, and I'm trying to remember. I made a short link for it. Oh, good grief! Offhand, I've had my head knee deep in a different research project right now, so I don't always. I'm just going to look at my own book. Where do I have it? It is. Oh, it's pretty easy. Okay, it's one of those short links. It's just bit.ly/paratex, which is case sensitive. So I wonder how I could share this with you.
Well, could you put it on your? It's not on your website, is it?
I am just revamping my website, but I should put a link to that. I will make it. I'll make a link to that. Make sure that is the right one. Yeah, that's what I will do. I'll add it to my. So by the time this comes out, I will add that on my website, and I'll either put it up on the top menu or I'll put it on what I'm up to. I have a thing there because I'm going to put a link to your interview, and then people can see. I've got a section called "What Tui's Working On." I could put it there under my updates. So I'll add that after we get off here. But yeah, I just really enjoy seeing what other people discover. I don't want to be the only one out there looking around to see what's going on. I want people to share their experiences, and then I want to be surprised. Like, I love it when I have a preconceived notion about, some topic, and then once I start researching it, I realize, wow, I'm totally wrong. This is neat. So,
well, it's good to have when you realize you're totally wrong, then you can move on to something else.
mm-hmm. Oh, it leads you to other stuff. It's like, I wouldn't want to write books if I knew it all. I want to learn it's exciting for me to write a book. I have ideas, but my books always take a left turn on me. They always do different things, and that's why they're fun to write. They're a big part of it.
Yeah, and you have a ton of books, so keep coming
I can't
out.
stop. I can't stop.
Well, one of the ones that you and I talked about at the UFO Congress in Phoenix this year, or that was way last year.
Oh, my goodness, yeah.
Way last year, like 2 weeks
so
ago.
long ago, yeah, exactly.
One was the Great Texas Airship Mystery of 1897, and you had all these diagrams that were made at the time from witnesses who said, well, this is what I saw. And they were anything from what looked like an airship to a dragon to whatever. And it was kind of interesting in talking to you. It's like when someone sees a UFO now and they draw a picture of it, it's pretty well, we know technology and we know what UFOs look like in movies and things. So we kind of use our information that we have in our head right now to kind of amplify what our drawing is going to be. Well, in 1897, there wasn't a lot of things flying in the sky. So people were trying to describe things that all kind of, it was an airship because airships were around. So maybe that's what it was, but it looked like this.
Well, they really weren't until 1903. So there were airships. There were some hot air balloons over in France, but there really were not hot air balloons or any controlled flight in America at this time. So they were still a fledgling thing over in Europe. But I want to back up a little because I sometimes joke that I used to write fiction, but then I moved to Texas. And this is a big reason why, because I, about 8 or 9 years ago, I found out that I think I was at a barbecue and this guy came up to me and, oh, you write? I'm like, yeah, I write. And he goes, oh, you know what you should write? And I'm thinking, oh boy, I'll just take a big bite of food because, I know he's going to tell me what I should be writing. And usually people say something like, you should be writing my life story or something. You should write. And I'm like, okay. So this guy goes, you should write about that little dead alien body they buried up the street from here. I'm like, what? Did I hear you right? And he goes, yeah, they buried an alien up there in this cemetery. You got to check it out. I still thought he was yanking my chain, but I had my little notebook with me. So I wrote it down. It was Aurora Cemetery. I thought, I've got to go see what this is. So my next, available day, I went up to Aurora Cemetery, and sure enough, there was a Texas state historical marker saying that in April of 1897, a cigar-shaped object crashed there in the main downtown, and it exploded. And the locals found a charred body, and there was enough of it remaining they could tell that it was not an inhabitant of this world. So it was the day before Easter, and so they buried the little critter. They put a pretty neat headstone on it. It's a rock, but it had a crudely carved in airship on the side with little portholes on the side. And so I ran around the cemetery. I found it. I took a picture of the headstone, and I thought, this is just insane. This is nutty. I have to do more research on this. So I went into the some newspaper archives, and I started looking for an airship in Aurora in 1897. And then I got really confused because I discovered that there were hundreds of airship sightings in a 2-month period right about then in Texas. So then I was totally confused, and I just kept looking into it. And as it turns out, this Texas Airship Mystery is part of an even greater phenomenon, which started in 1896 over in California, when people started seeing airships in the sky. Now, this is a time when the biggest thing you should have seen in the sky here in Texas might have been a turkey vulture. And so I wanted to know, and as you mentioned earlier, nowadays, if you see something funky in the sky, we have so much, we have so many movies and stories and posters and imagery. We have so much imagery, cultural imagery to draw upon. We already can kind of describe it in a lot of ways. Oh, it's a triangular shape. No, it's a cigar shaped, this, that, or the other. In 1897, they didn't. And so I really got fascinated by reading these newspaper accounts, and people would say things. Imagine, even machinery wasn't like gas-powered machinery, steam-powered machinery. This is not something you're going to be very well acquainted with in that time period. So people would describe they saw or they heard what sounded like hundreds of bees, a bee swarm coming toward them, only louder. And then they saw a great black bird in the sky, and they would often say cigar-shaped, which surprised me. And they would have these really wonderful descriptions of it. Oftentimes, I have a lot of descriptions of people who would then, here in Texas, we have to worry about tornadoes. They would go down into their tornado shelter. They're like, I saw something in the sky, and I didn't stick around to see what it was. Like nowadays, we like, I took a selfie with it, and in 1897, they're like, well, I don't know what that was. I just hid. I'm like, that is actually, to me, seems like a very legitimate response in the time period. And so I have just really, it's one of those topics where I just couldn't leave it alone. I wrote about it in my book, Unexpected Texas, and then I had the wonderful privilege of meeting Jim Mars, who is really the expert on this whole topic. Unfortunately, he passed away a couple of years ago, so I'm glad I did get a chance to meet him. And it's one of those stories that I have to admit, I thought it was like when I first heard it and that guy told me about it, like at the barbecue, I might have thought it was one of the stupidest things I'd ever heard and very unlikely. And that is a lot of people's reaction when I tell them what I'm into. But when I went back in and I spent the last 8 years or so reading these newspaper archives and what people said at the time and how they puzzled over it and tried to make sense of it, to me, it's really fascinating. I like I said, I've got a book coming out about it because I'm like, okay, if I'm going to be obsessing over this, I might as well share my obsession with others because it is pretty neat. There's everything from political cartoons that are talking about it. There are jokes. There is a couple hoaxes, people trying to fake people out about it. But more than anything, there's just a lot of puzzled people trying to make sense of what they were seeing in the sky.
Yeah, I could imagine. If something was that outside of the norm. Some of these things, during the Civil War, when everybody's like if you're in the battlefield, your attention is prickly. You're paying attention to every crack, every sound, every leaf turning 100 yards away from you. And there had been things seen in the sky then.
Well, and also the Union soldiers did use a balloon for reconnaissance, but this was just you getting in the balloon, it's tethered, it's going up in the air, and they're looking around. It wasn't controlled flight. So most people would not have seen that, and especially in Texas. And what people were observing in Texas was controlled flight. So this one thing this was all new to me. I didn't really know. I had never really thought about what would they have? To me, it's been really fun trying to get into that 1897 mindset. I really like that with historic research. I really try and think of, what would I have thought when I looked up? And, and people, one thing that surprised me was that some people made the connection and were speaking of Martians. I didn't realize the concept of a Martian even existed in 1897, but it did. And a lot of it had to do with that Italian astronomer, Schiaparelli, who had seen the canals, as he called them, on Mars with his telescope. And so that got everyone's imagination going. Anyway, go ahead. What were you going to say?
No, I was going to say, there was a lot of writings back then, whether it was, fiction and back in the day when people would write about visitors from, other planets and things like that.
Yeah, so it is interesting. And I do get into that a bit, into the, quote, fake news of the day, because there was a lot of, people treated newspapers differently in that time period because the newspaper was sort of like the one publication, so it had to serve a lot of purposes. It was your your straight news along with your entertainment, and sometimes they'd put in wild, outlandish stories as well. So yeah, there's that. So I did keep an eye out for that kind of thing too, and those are fun too. To see the kind of wild, the outlandish stories that people come up with as well.
Oh yeah, you've got you think about back in the day. That was about the time Jules Verne was still writing. So there was a lot of. He wrote about really cool things from Journey to Earth to all the, and it was the science fiction. So there was back then, just like there is now, a real interest to science fiction and things.
Yeah, like Edgar Allan Poe, he wrote a hoax. It was called The Great Balloon Hoax, is what it came to be known. But using a pseudonym, he wrote this story in the 1840s that had people captivated on the East Coast. He claimed that a guy had gotten in a balloon in England and that the winds had just, ripped him aside, because you can't really steer a balloon, and had taken him all the way across the Atlantic, and he'd landed. And people just ate it up. And then of course they realized it was just some hoax journalism, but people didn't get irate. People kind of expected the newspapers to string them along every now and then. And Edgar Allan Poe, it's got to be well written.
Oh yeah, he would really have you sucked in. That would be cool. He interesting, very very interesting writer, and the way that he would definitely captivate an audience pretty quick, and to come up with a hoax like that. There was a few stories. I was talking to somebody who, I can't remember what it was now. Oh, it's irrelevant. It'll get us off on a completely other tangent,
which is always easy.
Which is good. Actually, it's fun sometimes. But you had the sightings of airships, like you said, there were hundreds of sightings. And this was all, you ended up going out, and did you actually see, I understand there was that tombstone. Did you actually see it? I don't think it's there anymore, is it?
No, I'm glad I took photos when I did. I do have photos. I think if you go to my site and do a search for Aurora or alien headstone or something like that, you can just do any variation of it. You're going to see a picture of the original, the second one. There was the original one placed in 1897. Yep. Then there was one that was placed again in the 70s, because that one was stolen in 1972. And then this other one was stolen in 2012 or so, somewhere around there. I should look. It'll say on my...
The second one?
Yeah. And so I'm glad I went there shortly after I took photos of it. So I'm glad I got the pictures I did. And because of that, I sometimes see people that's kind of borrowed my photo. It's been splashed around here and there, because it's one of the last photos of that little, that cute little headstone with the cigar-shaped craft on it.
Yeah, and the one that, your photo of that kind of sandstone brown, that is the one, if people go online and look up Aurora Cemetery UFO, that's all you have to Google, and it'll come up, or Aurora Crash, Aurora Cemetery, and it's Tui's picture that you'll see.
Yeah, it gets borrowed a lot. That's okay.
Do you have any photographs of the original one, or have you ever tracked one down of the original one?
No, and I don't know, exactly when it was swiped. I've seen them online. I have seen some photos of that original one. Okay. I don't know if I have a link to it, and it looked a lot like this one that you'll see on mine, except it was broken a little bit. It hit, maybe the rock, froze and a chunk fell off at some point. I don't really think it was vandalism. I don't think any vandalism really happened until the story kind of resurfaced in the 1970s and people became interested in it again. This is one of those tales that just was nearly forgotten. That's one thing that I find so intriguing about it too. And it's interesting too, because when I was first looking into this, Aurora is a very small town. I think there's a population of 400, and a lot of locals were not too interested in talking about it. But now, if you go to their aurora.gov or whatever, auroratexas.gov, their official website, their logo is of a purple UFO crashing into a windmill, and their slogan is now Aurora, a legendary Texas town. I just think it's so cute. I'm glad they finally decided, we're just going to roll with it. I mean, people know us for this. Go with it.
There's a place, McMinnville, Oregon. It's there was a UFO spotted there 20-some years ago. And,
oh, yeah.
Once a year, they have this huge UFO festival that's incredible for the town. You get thousands of people coming in, vendors and speakers. I was down there a year or so ago and saw Bob Lazar, and
cool.
They have people kind of. I can't remember the name of the fella who was in the U.S. naval jet that was chasing the Tic Tac UFO.
Oh, yeah.
They had all these speakers coming in from all over the place to talk about UFOs, and it was all from one sighting of a UFO over 20 years ago. So.
Well, a few years ago, Aurora, in 2016, they actually asked me to speak on this topic, and that was great. That's when I got to meet Travis Walton and Jim Mars and all that, and it was something else. Like, this is a little town. It's only about 15 minutes away from me, but there was such an interest in it. It was one of the busiest conferences I've been to, and they haven't done it since. I wish they would, because it was such a success. It was so fun. They were giving tours of the site and of the crash site, and they were giving out water from the well that the alien craft had landed in, and people were coming out of the woodwork with their grandpappy story of what he thought had happened, and it was really great.
And you're poking around. What do you think happened?
I kind of go a few different directions. Sometimes I wonder if it was an inventor. There's a lot of evidence to show, or I don't know if evidence is the right word, but I'm just going to use it. A lot of things seem to indicate that there was maybe an inventor who wanted to get a prize for creating this manned flight. But so that's one possibility. I don't know, otherworldly, maybe, if you were going to appear at that time and you wanted to be sort of blend in a little historically, maybe you would try and look at like an airship. I really don't know. I hesitate to draw conclusions because to me, it's still like an open case. But there is some interesting things pointing toward a man named Wilson and a man named Smith. So once again, like when I looked back through all my notes and I started all over Texas, I started to, and these are hundreds of sightings, I started to notice certain names cropped up in different accounts, where there are a few accounts where people say they bumped into a human inventor. So like a farmer will say, I saw an airship in my field. There was a man there. He walked over to me and he said his name was Wilson. Things along that line.
Steve Wilson.
Yeah, Steve Wilson. I know. No. Oh my gosh, no. But so there are a few things like that. There's also the name Smith kind of came up a few times, which of course you think, oh, Smith, yeah, the most common name. But what's interesting is that back in 1896, there was a guy with the last name Smith who patented an airship. And a few months after that patent is when the first sighting was in California. So could this Charles Smith somehow be linked to some secret program? And then there's also this really intriguing tangent, too, with a man named Charles Delshow, who he did this incredible series of notebooks where he spent the last decades of his life up in his daughter-in-law's attic just creating these crazy scrapbooks in which he claimed to have been a member of this secret team that was creating, or he was, I think, their cartographer. But he claimed that there was a group of aeronauts, essentially, who were creating these airs. And he mentions the name Wilson in what he does, too. And the thing about his notebooks were they almost just ended up in the dump. A man walked by and saw him sitting out in the garbage, and he was a bookseller, and he thought, these are cool books. I don't know what they're about. He took them and he kept them in his bookshop for years. And so that's another thing. I need to look into him more. There's a lot to this whole thing. Like I said, I don't want to say that I know what it is, but I think people were seeing something. One big reason I think they were seeing something is that all of a sudden their accounts just end. So if this was just people having fun, why would it just so abruptly end?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I puzzle over this.
What was the timing like? You saw 100 of these sightings, but were they over a year or over a day or 6 months?
No, we're talking about pretty much in Texas from April through June. And that's just, there were a few.
So 3 months.
Mm-hmm, maybe, yeah. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them, especially March and April, there was a 6-week period where they were really heavy. And then and the thing about it is they kind of move. What gets me is they were moving west to east. So they started, back in September of 1896 in California. And then the sightings kind of move across America. You start to pick them up in newspapers anyway. Then in about March of 1897, they start to trickle into Texas. And then after a couple of months, suddenly I started reading about them in the New Orleans. Like they were moving east. So that got me going. I'm like, okay, so it moved over a state. And I've just been really focused on the ones in Texas, but I'm starting to look around a little more too to kind of get a better timeline on that. Yeah,
I was just curious if it was everybody saw them on the same day, but if it's a short window, and it makes sense that they would a bunch of people coming forward saying I've seen something today, or I've seen and the other thing too is a lot of, and these things happen like anytime people witness something that's a little out of the ordinary. Who knows? They could have all been seen in the same week, but back in the day, you didn't tell your neighbor you saw something until they maybe told you they saw something, and
well, there was a lot of that.
Later.
There were people who were afraid to say things. You do see the power of, like, no one wants to be mocked. And so there were a lot of people who, when even the newspapers, where some newspapers were more hesitant than others, but they would couch it with like a most reliable gentleman asserts, he was perfectly sober in every way. They would be vouching for him on all levels that he saw something in the air. So, it was interesting. That's one thing that I find compelling and intriguing, is to see how these sightings kind of trickled in to the newspapers, and how the newspapers themselves seem to be like, okay, don't think we're idiots, and there is a lot of mockery. There was a lot of mockery at first, and then you see more, and there, just as there is today, people make fun of people who have an experience that's out of the norm. So it was that's one thing that has me going on it. I don't know. I found it, the more I looked into it, the more I just could not keep, the more I had to look into it.
Well, I find it too is a lot of times, and specifically attending the Bigfoot conference in Kennewick, Washington. People had experiences 50 years ago, but are only sharing it now.
Oh,
because it's more mainstream. I'd sit at a table at the banquet with some couples that were, older retired couples in their 70s and literally in their 80s who had seen something 60 years ago or longer. Well, a lady, when she was a little kid, saw this Bigfoot picking apples out of the orchard or out of the tree behind her house. Of course, her family knows, Granny saw a Bigfoot, but let's not talk to her about that because, it's Granny. She's a little bit nuts. And she just kept her mouth shut. But they all go to these conferences because they can share their stories amongst everybody else because they've all had the experience.
Yeah.
So we do get, stories coming literally out of history. It's kind of fun.
I think that's really cool, and that is something I really would wish for with this, the 1897 airships. Is I would love. I've just focused my attention on the newspapers because that's the closest I could get to a firsthand account. But what I would love is to find a journal entry, just somebody be up in their attic and they, reading great grandpa's, farming or great grandma's farming journal. And she's like, yesterday I put up some butter and, round about sunset, I heard a whirring, and it would describe an airship and then just go on to the next day. Like, I would love to find something that wasn't in the papers, something that just a forgotten diary entry. And maybe they even forgot about it, because that's been my experience with some of the strange experiences I've had. That's another reason I think people should write them down. Is I've had things happen, and maybe, have you had this happen, James? Okay, something really weird happens, and then you're with your friend, and you're like, thank goodness I wasn't alone when this happened. And then you bring it up to that same person a couple months later or weeks later, and they're like, what? They don't remember it. Yeah. And that's why I go back. I think I've gone crazy, but I think it's because I've been those are the things I choose to remember, and I make brain space for them. But I think sometimes people don't. So I bet that somewhere someone's got a diary, and their great grandma or grandpa has seen, maybe saw one of the airships. To me, that would be really compelling.
And drawn pictures of it. That would be really cool.
That would be awesome. I would love that.
See, a number of the witnesses, I'm sure, drew it while they were explaining it to somebody, because it's the easiest thing to do.
I have a lot of those drawings that made the paper. I have a bunch of those, and they're really interesting to see. Because they try to make it bird-like, but they do mention the word cigar shape quite frequently. To me, I thought this whole cigar shape thing hadn't happened until the 40s or something. But in the 1890s, they were comparing them to cigars. That was very common. Oh, here's a weird thing that kind of came up that I just a puzzler. I don't know why, but I had enough of descriptions of people where they mentioned that they would see a black dog in the ship as it passed, which I thought was weird. Why would you see a black dog? What does that even mean? I don't know what to make of it. One reason I hesitate to draw conclusions is I really don't want to project my ideas on it too much. I'm just still down there in the papers, you know what I mean? I'm still trying to just, what were people seeing? I hesitate to connect too many dots, but why would people see a black dog? And I wonder, are there UFO sightings? I seem to think that there have been where people have seen a black dog, but I don't know.
I don't know. It's, what heck, look what the Russians did when they had
No, that's true.
Yeah, when they were testing their rockets, they put a dog in it.
Well, that's what the Montgolfier brothers did with their hot air balloon. The French guys, the Montgolfiers, they put up, I think, a rooster, a dog, and a goose or something like that.
Yeah. So a rooster, a dog, and a goose were in a hot air balloon.
Yeah. Sounds like a start of a joke.
It's a good joke. A rooster, a dog, and a goose walk into a bar. So where's the hot air balloon? So it could have been a farmer doing his experiment and stuck his dog in the thing and said, "Okay, we'll see if you can breathe in the air."
Yeah, I know, because that would have been a concern. People really didn't. There were some people, I've read some accounts when I've been looking this up, they didn't think that a person could go faster than 30 miles an hour or something without, exploding. I mean, their ideas of what humans could endure and what might happen up there and where heaven began. It's very fun to look at. And,
it is interesting. It is interesting, and I'm glad you kind of dug around it. And that book is in production?
Yes. Well, it's a big messy manuscript that I'm polishing because, I got to make it to book size, but there's so much research. It's going to have a lot of photos in it, straight from the newspapers, just so you can see what the people saw, a lot of headlines straight from the newspapers. So I'm hoping that will come out in April. That's my goal.
Well, do you just hit the archives for those to get that information?
Yeah, I go through different ones. I have, because I do a lot of research anyway, so I go through several different newspaper archives. There's one that I do that's not even a paid one. It's old Fulton postcards, and it's this man, or his labor of love has just been to scan and put online newspapers. And you can find some real gems on there, some real interesting things. But yeah, I hit up several different newspaper archives, and for this project, that's pretty much all I can do. It's as direct as I can get. With my other stuff, I like to, and I like to go there in person too. But, at this point.
It's fun around in the old microfiche and stuff. Mm-hmm. I'm not overly computer literate. If when he posts, that gentleman who posts the newspapers on, is that searchable?
Yeah, it's a little bit clunky. What is it? I think I have Old Fulton. I'm typing it up. Old Fulton Postcards, I think, is the name of it. And it's just kind of a FultonHistory.com. I guess that's where you go. It is just the neatest thing. Yeah, just go to FultonHistory.com. It's a little bit, it can be a little glitchy sometimes, but you can do a lot of searching on that site. Okay. And it's free. And this person if you've got a few shekels to spare, he's certainly someone to support. It says he has over 47 million old newspaper pages from U.S. and Canada.
That is kind of cool.
It really is. And I go to newspapers.com and just other ones that librarians have shared with me. Texas has some good searchable portal to Texas state history, but I just dig around as much as I can.
When you're doing your research and you're doing the older stories through the local, like the Aurora area, do you also do the cross-reference to like the state archives to see what filtered uphill?
What do you mean? Yeah, I do. I have some state resources for sure.
Oh, okay, cool. I was just curious on the extent of your research, and like you say, you've got a lot of information, and you're definitely. It's just kind of funny. I've asked that because I have things I want to look up, and I don't know how far to go. So I'm now diverting from the interview into like, so how do I do this?
Yeah,
like, I know it's funny. It's
but
it's fun.
Research is fun
to get. Yeah, and that's what was fun part about me being a policeman. You get to dig around. Like it's a puzzle. You get a question, and you just keep going, and you got to keep going. And that's the whole paranormal investigation thing too. Is that you usually come into those because you're filled with questions, and when you leave, you should have more questions than you went in with.
And you know what? One of my favorite little museums is one that is by the sheriff over in Eastland County, because for some reason, a lot of historians can kind of not want to share their information with each other. I don't know why. I think this is an old school way of being, where sometimes I will be researching a topic and I go into a town that's got a population of 1,200, and I'm just going to call it Podunk. And I go, oh, look, there's the Podunk Historical Society. And then right across the street, there's the Historical Society of Podunk. And more often than not, they are not on speaking terms. And when I go, hey, Carrie over at the Podunk Historical Society mentioned that, we don't mention Carrie's name. I'm like, we don't mention her name. I'm like, oh. And so then I realized, oh my goodness, so I have to be real careful. I'm like, if you guys would just pool your resources, you have so much in common. You guys should be buddies. So one of my favorite museums is actually this little jail museum that the sheriff has created on his own. I was researching a lynching, and the local historians didn't want to talk about it because, no one wants to be associated with a lynching. I was not writing an article like how to lynch or, why lynching is cool. It was nothing like that. It was just part of something that had happened. I'm not condoning it in any way, shape, or form. But but I found the only way I really was able to find information was when I talked to the sheriff, and he gave me a private tour of the old jail, and he had done a lot to preserve the old, I guess you wouldn't call it a guest book, but where the the prisoners would sign in.
The logging book, yeah.
Thank you. He had the prisoner log. Okay, I don't know. I was like, guest book, that is not right. But he had it. I know, maybe you should call it in air quotes. Yeah, he had that professionally restored by archivists, and I was like, this is nicer than some museums I've been to. And he was able to reenact this one scene that I couldn't figure out.
You lynched somebody?
Well, yeah, it was not the lynching part, but it was a scuffle. I was having a hard time putting together, because when you do research, you know this from being a Mountie, people give you the same incident. You get, you talk to 3 different people, you get 3 different scenarios, and you're trying to just write up.
That's how you know it's the truth.
Yeah. There you go. Oh, I love that. That is something. Yeah. So I was trying to put together all this stuff, and anyway, that was, I guess I got off on a tangent there, but we were just talking about people who truly love history, and I felt like he was really coming at it with the right idea. He was just saying, hey, this happened, and I'm here to preserve it.
Yeah, and that's cool. We need more people like that, because it's disappearing. And I live in a part of the world where buildings are only 150 years old.
Yeah.
And you go to the eastern seaboard, and they're back to the late 1500s, or or earlier. It's depending on what they were made of. And I was talking to a gentleman, Jay Verber, who is a paranormal investigator. He was in a TV series. What was that series? Haunted Minds or something. He was the rookie, the new kid, the junior guy. Anyway, Jay lives in a very wonderfully haunted hotel in Wheeler, Oregon.
Sounds nice.
With his partner Kate, and it's a great place. But he says that when people moved out to the West Coast from the East, they came out here to make their fortune. And then once they got their fortune, they planned on moving back home. So the residences were made of wood. They weren't made of stone. Unless you were like the owner of the logging company, you didn't build your house out of stone because you weren't planning on living here your whole life.
I never thought of it in that way.
Yeah, a lot of the history is either burnt down or is collapsed. So it's interesting. So that 1800s Pacific Northwest history, it's this is where so and so used to live.
Yeah.
But they don't. There's no buildings. The government buildings exist. Later on, when the government's got basically the governor's mansion and the governor. All governing buildings and periphery to look after the state or the province where I live, and they're made out of stone, and some of the old hotels. But no, if you were going to come out here to make your fortune in the 1800s, you were just temporary. So you'd build a nice cabin, and that was about it.
Well, yeah, architecture really does reflect our attitude. And it gives you a feeling in return.
Yeah, it is interesting. Now, and I've been to Dallas and I've been to Fort Worth. For me, in my mind, they're both connected. Like they weren't. It didn't seem like they were 30 miles apart. It seemed like they were across the other side of the highway. It's just just bouncing back and forth in that area. And there is some really cool older buildings, and they're tiny, and they're adobe and stone. It's and then all of a sudden you've got the modern buildings. It was like there was a switch. The wooden buildings, what exists, are about to fall down if they haven't caught fire yet. I didn't get a chance to go to.
I think the Dallas courthouse burnt down like 4 times before they finally made a brick one that's there now. Yeah. And that's happened in a few places. But yeah, in Texas, really, the courthouse squares are where you're going to find the most magnificent buildings. And those are the ones that are from the 1880s that were made of limestone or red granite. And those are really the wonderful buildings that are going to have the delightful town square still around. Like, if you're just looking for something fun to do in Texas and you don't even have one of my books, you should have one of my books. But if you don't, or even if you do, just I would say head to one of the historic town squares, the courthouse squares, and that's where you're going to find all the history and the haunted lore and the fun stuff. So
where are we going to go to find one of your books?
Oh, you just head to Amazon and type my name in. They're all there.
Tui Snider and Amazon. You've got another book in the works. Touch real briefly on 6 Feet Under Texas, but are you travel around doing speakings, talks? Are you doing anything coming up in the next few months, or have you got any plans on coming to a conference again?
This is the time of year where usually people reach out. I do have a talk over in Weatherford coming up at the end of the month. I'll be talking about understanding cemetery symbols. And Weatherford, Texas has a really gorgeous historic cemetery with a lot of headstones that have really unique symbols on them. In fact, for my book, Understanding Cemetery Symbols, I actually have a lot of photos from the Weatherford Cemetery. So I'm excited to be giving a talk there on one of my favorite topics, because it's just something that's something I'll never quit learning about. Just
the cemeteries and the history.
Yeah, and the symbolic the symbolic meaning on the headstones. It's so fascinating. And yeah, there's just more, it's one of those things you think, there's not much to it, and it'll be a quick little handout that I'll put together, and then it just grows and grows, and you realize, wow, there is a lot of symbolism out there, and we've really lost our symbolic understanding. There's a lot of symbolism that just goes right over our heads as modern humans and modern Americans. I love it. We just walk right by this stuff. But I think even in the Victorian era and earlier, people had a more poetic relationship and a more deeper connection to the symbols around them. So that's been one thing I really love looking into.
Yeah, if you think about the older cemeteries, it was and funerals themselves, they were a big deal. Now
yeah.
it's like, oh crap, what time is it? Oh, I'm going to die. Okay, what am I going to do with my body?
Yeah, yeah. People
What do
used
you mean
to.
a plot is $30,000?
Mhm.
Yeah, put it on my visa. 'Cause I'm not going to pay it.
Well,
So
nowadays it's up
it's a
to
big deal.
your relatives. You die, and then your
Yeah.
relatives have to figure out what to put on your headstone. But if I had come into some money, 100 years ago or so, 120 years ago, if I'd come into some money in my 30s, I would have then been like, okay, I am commissioning my headstone now, and it's going to be grand, and it's going to express this, and I'm going to have these symbols on it, so people will all know this, that, and the other about me, and tell my life story. But after the Great Depression, people kind of had to move, and so no one was there to tend your plot, and it just cemeteries quit being such an important part of our lives. I mean, in America, our first public parks were our garden cemeteries. That was what we had before we had public parks. And so, yeah, I think nowadays there's a bit of a stigma. People think, oh, you must be weird. Or whenever I give that talk, people will come up to me afterwards and go, oh my gosh, I thought I was so weird, that I like to go to historic cemeteries. But now I understand. It's just cemeteries are for the living, and I'm taking part in a tradition. So. And
they're not overly haunted.
Yeah. No, not really.
People go, oh, we go to the cemetery and talk to ghosts. So they go, why would a ghost be in a cemetery?
I'm always saying that. I think it's just people are quiet enough to hear something. It's like the library and bookstore. Those are quite often haunted too.
You know how to get a dead person to a cemetery? Like a spirit? You read the name on the tombstone.
Oh, well.
And they'll show up and go, who are you?
Did you Google me? Yeah, what are you?
Yeah, it's like literally. It's like if you put your recorder down on a grave and just... You can do it out loud or in your head. Just read over what's written on the tombstone a few times. And then ask if James is there. And hopefully that was one of the names you read. But Steve.
Yeah, Steve.
Steve,
yeah.
Can you get James for me?
Would you just leave me alone? Yeah, Steve.
Because they'll show up and go, what? Who are you?
Yeah,
what? We're just checking. But that's it. Like, there's no... other than children, there's some children every so often will be in a graveyard, which is creepy.
Well, our mutual friend Teal is always telling me I tend to have a little gaggle of children around me, and I get that over and over. One time I went to visit her, and I didn't tell her I'd spent the morning going to several historic cemeteries, and when I walked in, she just said, "What is going on with you? You have like a little entourage of children around you." And
which is actually really good. If you because you're an empath, you have a very, very high vibration. You go to a place like that, and the kids are all like, "Oh, we're going to go home with her."
Well, that happens when I go to the Thanksgiving. I'm like, oh, I'm going to go sit at the kids' table anyway. So I guess it made sense to me, but it is kind of funny.
Yeah, they'll just tag along and they want to come home with you. We get a lot of them. Like when I was doing paranormal investigations, we get the ones where, my daughter is now seeing a little kid, this little kid in the closet. My daughter's like 5, 6, 4 or 5. And you say, when did it start? She was sick. She was in the hospital for a few weeks, and then we came home. And now, so yeah, they tag because they died in the hospital.
Sure.
Great grandmother shows up and says, "Okay, Billy, you're gonna have to come to the light with me." And it's like, no, don't know who you are. I'm gonna wait.
You don't have any toys. She has toys. They brought her a stuffed bunny.
Yeah, so they stay in the hospital, and then when a loving parent, they watch some loving parent with their kid, they'll go, "Oh, I'm gonna go home with them because they get a nice mom, and I haven't seen my mom and dad." So. And then you realize, oh, yes, the little kid just tagged along with your kid because it's a good energy. So very interesting. Then you trying to cross a kid over. It's crazy sometimes.
Oh.
I've got one in the house here. She's about 10. We call her Annie.
Oh.
But she helps out with when there's other things in the house that aren't supposed to be here. She's like the first one. Like she's a canary in the coal mine.
That's nice.
Kind of runs around and gets our attention and then full psychic in and goes, oh, yeah, you brought... In July, we cleared 9 out of here in July.
Oh gosh!
With the help of 4 elemental beings and Annie.
And wow!
But we cleared out shape-shifting, non-human things. We cleared out human
freaky.
Ghosts that came through a portal. Slaves from back in the day from the eastern U.S.
Wow!
We had a psychic remotely come here to see what was going on, and she said, "I can't get into that room." I start coughing. She was like in Washington State coughing, trying to do a remote view. I can't even get close to it. I start coughing. And the psychic that came here and says, oh, yeah, you've got a gentleman here who's actually on fire.
Oh,
and that was
Burning Man.
He was a slave in the eastern U.S. and his wife and son, and he died in a fire. And they came through and crossed him over. So that was easier.
Yeah.
But Skeeter said, I can't get into that room. There's something going on. And then the psychic that came here didn't know that story, didn't hear about that. And she was fascinated to hear that a remote viewer couldn't remote view because there was so much smoke in the room. So.
It was too smoky.
But it was all clear enough. But that was Annie. Annie was helping us with that. But, the kids I like kids.
Well, me too.
To a point. I got grabbed. My hand got grabbed by one down in Tombstone, Arizona. In the San Jose house, which are old rooming houses from the 1800s, grabbed my hand and ran under the bed, thumping as he was running by. And psychic said, I was a little boy. Just wanted to let you know you were in a space. And then in that old Wheeler Hotel in Oregon, got up, went back to bed, and a little girl in the middle of the night says, Daddy?
Oh, wow.
Oh, no, thanks.
Anyway,
that'd
be scary.
Yeah, that was kind of freaky. But other than that, I've been good staying away from ghosts as best I can. Do you have when Teal says, okay, Tui, you've got this little entourage of kid spirits or any spirits behind you, do you actually feel them?
I sometimes I'll be like, I had a flash in my head of that. Like I will have discounted some experience beforehand. I won't be aware at the time. I will be like, but when I was there, I was in my mind's eye, I saw like a little boy with blonde hair or something, or I saw a little cluster of kids over there. So now I take those more seriously because when someone else says something like that, but at the time I would just be like, I'm just having like a daydream. It just flits through. It's not like a dwelling. It's just like an image. But now I'm like, it's made me take those more seriously.
So you see them like I do. You see them as, if you can just shut your eyes right now and imagine somebody you went to high school with.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And picture them in your head. That's how we see them. Usually from the waist up or about mid-thigh up, and just a picture in your mind's eye. And you're wondering, okay, remembering somebody you went to high school with, that's easy because you know who the person is. But when you get a stranger in that image in your head that comes out of nowhere, that's a clue.
But the funny thing is, you get conditioned by Hollywood, so you think that a vision means you're seeing some full 3D holographic apparition, But I've over time have come to realize all these things are much more subtle. So like, all the clairs, like that little image that flits through your head, that is something worth paying attention to, and that is something you should write down in your notes, and then later on, and you're not necessarily going to hear something out loud, but you might just in your mind's ear hear it. Although I did have a fun experience when I went to a cemetery in Mineral Wells where Teal saw it, because me and the little kid thing, she goes, you got to go read the epitaph on that one. That one's for you. So I ran over to it, and I saw that the epitaph said, "The orphan's true friend." And I was like, well, that's neat. So I'm kneeling down to take a picture. I'm taking about 4 pictures of it because the light's shifting. And as I'm kneeling down, all of a sudden I hear little kids, like 3 or 4 little kids giggling. And in my mind's eye, I see a picture of like these 3 kids. And I could tell exactly where but I heard it. I really thought they were kids. I stand up and I'm like, how funny. Now I hear kids. I look over to where they should be and there's nothing there, but the hair stands up on my arms. I'm like, oh. So that was kind of fun. I don't remember which at this point. Okay. I did just point to my left arm though when I was telling the story. Yeah. So maybe it was.
Yeah, that's usually as a result of the person who makes your hair stand up. It's usually that volunteer human relative friend of yours that comes in to be your in between your spirit guides and you. And if it's your left arm, it's a female. Males will make your right arm.
Oh.
Yeah, because it's a side thing. I just thought I'd throw that out.
No, that is interesting. Yeah. No, I have. Well,
I talk to so many people about so many
I know,
woo
there's
things.
so many things to talk about. It's great, though.
Yeah, it's just crazy. We've been talking to Tui Snider. Please go to our website, tuisnider.com. She's an author and a speaker out of Texas and, out of the U.S., basically. And if you want her to speak at something haunting related in Australia, I'm sure she'd go if you paid.
Oh, I'd love it, for sure.
Yeah,
Cemetery symbols, whatever. I talk about them.
And 6 Feet Under Texas, really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
New book again. None of your books you're researching. What's it about?
Well, this is the stuff that wouldn't fit. This is a chapter that when my Understanding Cemetery Symbols book was being edited, I had a chapter that was just kept getting bigger, and my editor, who also happens to be my dad, who's a retired editor, but he comes out for my books. He said, honey, this chapter does not belong. This is a separate book. And what it is it's all the unusual burials. So the quirky, the infamous, the historic burials that have happened in Texas. So I'm calling it 6 Feet Under Texas. And so there's things in there like Dimebag Darrell Abbott, he's buried in a Kiss coffin, the band Kiss. You can buy their coffins, and he's got buried with one of Eddie, who is it? A famous guitarist guitar who I'm blanking out on right now. One of Eddie Van Halen's guitars. So I've got that one in there. I've got all these quirky ones. There's a man over in West Texas who, when he was buried, he made sure they had a phone line to his mausoleum for 3 days, just in case he woke up. Because he was like, I drink myself pretty blind sometimes. What if you bury me when I'm, and then I wake up? So there's that guy. I've got a headstone that's shaped like a calculator, and then on the calculator it says hello. I've got a grave of Pat the Horse. Just all sorts of fun things in there. Howard Hughes' grave, just any burial that's got a really interesting story behind it that might be worth taking a road trip to is going to be in this book. So I'm having a lot of fun with it.
What's his name? About William Babcock.
Yeah, Willett Babcock, the Jesus in Cowboy Boots. I have got. That is an amazing historic cemetery for one thing. There is really great stuff there. But yeah, that is actually his tomb is one of the reasons I ended up writing Understanding Cemetery Symbols, because he has got upside down torches on it, and people were spreading a rumor online that this meant that he was an atheist. And I'm like, oh, come on. That just stands for, the Victorians used a lot of things where they would use the idea of being upside down to stand for death. So being upside down and then the flame still burning meant it stood for eternal life. So I thought, really, isn't there a book about this? And I went looking, and I couldn't find the little field guide to historic cemeteries. So Willett Babcock was really one of the reasons I ended up writing that book. I love that Jesus in cowboy boots. It's very Texan.
Now, Bonnie and Clyde, she's buried somewhere in Texas too, isn't she?
She is not that. They are buried separately, and yeah. And also Machine Gun Kelly, while we're talking about some famous gangsters. There's also this really crazy tale that I don't even remember all the details about. But the guy who wrote American Pie, Don McLean?
Yeah.
He wrote a song about a mummified one-legged dwarf. And the reason he wrote this song is that it's just a crazy tale. It's like I should have brought it up because I don't have all the details in my head, but it's like you can Google the song. It's like the strange song about Andrew McGee, and he fell off a train, and he only had one leg anyway, so he was a one-legged dwarf who fell off a train. Some people found the body, and they mummified him and stuck him in a window, hoping that a passerby would see him and go, oh, hey, I know that guy. No one ever did. But what's funny is people, when I give my cemetery symbols talk and I talk about this or different stories along this line, like, nowadays we all have ID and we're pretty easy to find. You Google someone and their Facebook page comes up. But back in the day, not everybody carried ID. And I even have a story in Paranormal Texas. There's a family of 6 who just all died by a creek bed. And they didn't have any ID. And to this day, nobody knows who they were. So they're just unmarked graves. So,
wow.
If you or I just were traveling and we just dropped dead in the street and people didn't know what to do, our body would probably end up they would embalm us and then put us in a chair and put us in a window, a prominent window downtown, and then hope someone would recognize us. And people just gasp when I tell them that. It's kind of fun to think of all the things that have changed, but how else are you going to be recognized? So there's this whole crazy tale about this one-legged dwarf that just ended up, when no one claimed him, someone just bought it. They said, well, that'd be kind of cool. We could put a tuxedo on him and put him in our sideshow. So he traveled the world, he traveled America in the sideshow, and then he ended up in somebody's basement. And they're like, this kid is like, yeah, that was in my aunt's basement for years, was this mummified dwarf, Finally, she got enough money to bury the dwarf, and but she didn't have enough for a headstone. So Don McLean wrote a song about the whole shebang, and he used the proceeds to buy a nice headstone for this mummified one-legged dwarf. Yeah,
that's kind of cool. My friend Nora operates the last remaining mortuary in Tombstone, Arizona.
Oh, neat!
And I think it was 4 of them back in the 1800s because it was relatively busy there. Actually, they had more. What do you call the mortuary guys?
Embalmers?
No? The people who own them, that run them. Anyway.
Oh, I don't know.
I can't remember what the guys are called. Who
I'm blanking too.
Yeah. Anyway, they had to be, back in the day, they had to be master carpenters.
Oh, yeah.
And there was 4 of them, and I think there were 4 or 5 maybe in Tombstone, and there was only 2 in Chicago.
Wow.
That's how busy they were. But when you stand in front of her shop, there's the main office or the entrance area on the right. Then there's the garage door where the cart would go in, the Black Maria. And beside it is a narrow little thin window, and that's your display window.
Oh.
So they would put you in a coffin, pack you in ice, and put you up against that window.
Wow.
And they had to do that if they didn't know who you were, because the state would pay the people of the guy $2 to bury an unknown person. Mm-hmm. And that's back when people made like 10 cents.
That's a lot.
Mm-hmm. So they did really well. But one of the things is they had to try to identify the body. So Buddy would be packed in ice and stuck in the window for X amount of days. Undertaker, that's the guy's name.
Oh, Undertaker, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so the undertakers would do that. So it's kind of interesting when you stand and look at her building and you realize how many deceased were looking out of that window.
Yeah.
It's kind of creepy.
That's pretty fascinating.
Yeah. Do you? There's a family in Texas somewhere. The entire family are buried in the same grave.
Oh, I have a video about that on my YouTube channel. That's Smiley's grave, and I did a bit of YouTube.
Smiley? Okay.
I cleared Smiley's name. Now, there's you will even see this in books. You'll see it in articles. People claim that Smiley was some sort of mass murderer, and no, he was not. If you want to find out the tragic truth about Smiley's grave, you could just go to my YouTube channel, and it's got a little 5-minute video, and I break it down for you.
Oh, cool. I'll have to do that because I heard about that. I didn't know their name was Smiley. I just heard the weird things about it, the myths. If you were like laying on the grave, you'd feel your hands reach up and grab you or something. And I thought, that's probably a place I don't want to go. But the name's Smiley. It sounds like quite happy.
I know. It's a little ironic. But now, anyway, you just got to go because I'll just let people look into that. It was pretty fun to do the research on that one.
Very cool. And again, that's Tui Snider. Just go into YouTube, search Tui Snider, Tui, and then Snider without a CH, not Schneider, but Snider, Snider. Pretty basic, no Y in it. And check that out.
Dig around. I got a serial killer grave. I got the Lost Cemetery of Infants. What else do I have? I got Deep Creek Cemetery. I got some fun stuff.
That's
you
really
can check
cool.
out.
You're the coolest living person in all the cemeteries. Tui Snider, author, speaker. Look for, if you're in a paranormal conference anywhere in the U.S., check the Who's Talking, and Tui might pop up. She's bouncing all over the place. Last time we got together was in Phoenix, Arizona, at a UFO conference down there. But yeah, it was fun because you were promoting your Great Texas Airship Mystery, which is coming out pretty. And one of the things I was really impressed with is you actually have a. Here's me trying to end the interview, and it's not going to happen. You have a paranormal journal, which is kind of cool. And I always remember that because I was talking to Teal, who's the psychic who was with you, and I was saying, you just got to make more notes. And she goes, well, yeah, I really need to get a notebook. And
which I gave her for her birthday.
Yeah, which is like she's leaning on a pile of journals, and I'm.
That's right.
You know, you really just get a book, just any book that's blank, and
I know.
And and she goes, yeah, I don't know where to get one. I said, well, look down in front of you.
That was very funny. I was laughing. Yeah, it wasn't dawning on her yet, and I saw where you were going with that. I was laughing pretty hard. Yeah, my ghost hunter's journal. I mean, people. If you have a ghost hunter in your life, or you are a ghost hunter, even if it's not mine, you should just have a dedicated journal where you write down all your stuff. Yeah, if you take away nothing from today's talk, take that away.
And one of the things I'd like, for people who want to do paranormal investigations, one of the things I want to talk about with journaling, with a notebook, please take a pencil and do sketches.
That is a good idea.
If you're sitting in the quiet and just sketch whatever comes to mind. And see, I did that, and at the same time I was sitting in this kid's room who was being tormented by the dead. A psychic was out on the property with another group talking about what she saw, and she described a girl falling from the tree and breaking her arm. I was sitting in the kid's bedroom drawing a picture of a girl with her arm in a sling.
Whoa.
And I had no idea why I was drawing a picture of a girl with an arm in a sling. And then at the end of the night, when we get together and we start comparing notes, they were talking about a girl who had fallen out of the tree and broken her left arm. And I flipped through my book and said, look, and there was a picture of me. I had sketched a young girl with her left arm in a sling.
That is great.
Don't know how they connected, but I got that information exactly at the same time the psychic was seeing this girl fall out of a tree. And the tree wasn't even there. It was like the stump. But she said years earlier, a girl had fallen out of the tree. So that was kind of interesting. So, yeah, just sketch things.
It'll make it more fun. It's not drudgery to keep a notebook. It's going to make it more fun for you.
Yeah, and definitely, and it really, and this is coming from a policeman, notes are made to refresh your memory. You don't have to take everything down. It can be point form.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Refresh
you can flesh them out later,
memory.
But just get the main little bits and bobs because those will just slip away.
Well, it's like as you as a writer, you'll take point notes at a location, and then afterwards you can look at them and draw a paragraph at every point or two.
Definitely.
An essay out of some of them. All right, Tui.
Yes.
Gosh darn it. Have a wonderful day. Thank you very much for dropping by. And I'm going to bring you back on, and we're going to talk a little. I think we're going to come back and we'll talk more about symbolism in cemeteries, because that's a very, very interesting topic. And I know my listener will be really interested in that.
Oh, yeah, that'd be really fun. Sure, that'd be great. And I had a blast. Thank you, James.
Thank you.
That's it. Let's roll. And hey! Let's be careful out there.
Far over the snow, what are those voices? They sing as they go. What are those voices? Look over the mountain. Somebody better hide on through the hill, like a pack of angry wolves on the trail. Dead or alive, we are out to get you, dead or alive. And forget your ghost. done, you are done. So